New York, 2024. The city that never sleeps was brighter than ever, not just from the neon lights of its towering skyscrapers, but from the cold blue glow of technology. Self-driving cars glided through crowded streets, drones buzzed overhead delivering packages, and massive digital billboards displayed vivid images, inviting everyone to step into a future where artificial intelligence, AI, governed every aspect of life. Yet, behind the dazzling facade lay a harsh truth. Injustice and racial discrimination still thrived, no longer blatant, but hidden within systems that appeared neutral and objective. Jamal Carter, 28, sat quietly in the corner of his office on the 42nd floor of a Manhattan skyscraper. A talented programmer, he was one of the youngest hires at this leading tech company. But even after 3 years, Jamal still felt like an outsider. The subtle glances, the offhand remarks laced with bias, and the lack of recognition for his contributions had become a routine part of his daily life. Jamal stared at his computer screen, where lines of code scrolled endlessly like an infinite maze. He was working on a critical project, a cutting-edge facial recognition system his company was developing. The product was being marketed as a breakthrough in public safety, eagerly sought after by government agencies and major corporations. But Jamal knew the system was far from perfect. In recent months, he had noticed a troubling issue. The system had a significantly higher error rate when identifying black faces and those of other minority groups. At first, Jamal thought it was just a minor glitch in the algorithm, something that could be easily fixed. But as he dug deeper into the data and testing reports, he realized the problem was no accident. The training data for the system was overwhelmingly based on images of white individuals, leading to poor performance when applied to people outside that demographic. This wasn't just a technical flaw, it was a systemic bias, an ethical failure. Jamal tried to raise the issue with his supervisor, Alan White, the head of the engineering department, but Alan simply shrugged and said, "Jamal, I get your concern, but we don't have time to fix these little issues. The clients don't care. They just want a product that works well enough to sell." Those words felt like a knife to Jamal's chest. He knew technology was never just technology. It reflected human biases, and if left unchecked, it could amplify injustice. But in a company where people like him were a minority, Jamal's voice seemed to carry little weight. He confided in Derek Brown, a black colleague who worked in the data security department. Derek was a realist, someone who had been in the tech industry long enough to understand the power dynamics. When Jamal told him about his intention to escalate the issue, Derek shook his head. "Jamal, I get it. You're angry, and you should be. But do you really think they'll listen to us? We're just employees. If you speak up, they'll find a way to ruin you. Trust me, I've seen it happen before." Derek's words left Jamal conflicted. He knew Derek was right. Tech wasn't an easy space for people like them. But Jamal couldn't stop thinking about the consequences this system could have. If it was deployed without being fixed, it could lead to unfair surveillance of predominantly black and immigrant neighborhoods or even wrongful arrests. One evening, while browsing the internet for information on ethics and technology, Jamal stumbled upon an ad for a seminar titled "Technology and Ethics: Confronting Bias in AI." The event was hosted by a nonprofit organization called Code for Justice, founded by Sophia Lee. Sophia was an Asian American activist known for her powerful speeches on algorithmic bias and how technology could exacerbate social inequities. Jamal decided to attend the seminar, not just to learn more but to find solidarity. Sitting in the back row, he listened as Sophia spoke about cases where biased algorithms had harmed vulnerable communities. She held up a photo from a recent news article, a black man wrongfully arrested because a facial recognition system had misidentified him as a suspect. "This isn't a failure of technology," Sophia said, her voice strong yet filled with emotion. "This is a failure of the people who create it. When we don't ask questions, when we don't examine the biases embedded in our data, we are complicit in perpetuating injustice." Her words struck a chord with Jamal, resonating with the frustration he had been suppressing for so long. When the seminar ended, he approached Sophia. Hesitant at first, he finally said, "I work for a big tech company. I've seen exactly what you're talking about happen in our product, but I don't know what to do. If I speak up, I could lose everything." Sophia looked at him, her gaze both empathetic and resolute. "If you don't speak up, who will? Sometimes, to change the world, we have to take risks." Sophia introduced Jamal to Rachel Martinez, a civil rights attorney who promised to support him if he decided to blow the whistle on his company. Rachel said, I won't lie to you, Jamal. This won't be easy. But if you have evidence, we can do something to make a difference. Jamal left the seminar feeling a mix of emotions. He knew he couldn't stay silent, but the fear of losing everything weighed heavily on him. He had worked hard to get to where he was, and he didn't want to throw it all away for one reckless act. Yet deep down, Jamal knew that if he did nothing, he would never forgive himself. Jamal Carter stepped into the conference hall at the Brooklyn Community Center, feeling both out of place and curious. It was his first time attending a seminar on technology and ethics, a topic he hadn't given much thought to before. But after what he had witnessed at his company, he felt compelled to seek answers, or at least find a space where he could share the heavy thoughts weighing on his mind. The room wasn't large, but it was cozy and packed with people. Rows of chairs were neatly arranged, and on the stage stood a young Asian woman speaking into a microphone, her eyes alight with passion. This was Sophia Lee, the founder of the nonprofit organization Code for Justice, which focused on fighting algorithmic bias in technology. Sophia wasn't just a social activist. She was also a renowned speaker who had spent years researching and advocating against the harmful effects of biased algorithms on marginalized communities. Jamal took a seat in the back row, trying not to draw attention to himself. He didn't want anyone to recognize him, especially if a colleague happened to be there. But as Sophia began to speak, his worries seemed to fade. Her voice was strong, filled with conviction, and every word she said felt like it was directed at him. "We live in an era where technology is celebrated as the solution to all our problems," Sophia said, her gaze sweeping across the room. "But what many fail to realize is that technology isn't always fair. The algorithms we create are not neutral entities. They are built on data, and that data often reflects the biases and injustices of our society." Sophia went on to share specific examples: facial recognition systems with high error rates for identifying Black and Asian faces, hiring algorithms that rejected female candidates because historical data favored men, and credit systems that denied loans to people simply because they lived in low-income neighborhoods. Each story she told felt like it was describing Jamal's own company, the very system he was working on. "These technologies are not just tools," Sophia emphasized. "They have the power to change people's lives, but if we're not careful, they can also exacerbate injustice. And it is our responsibility as creators of technology to ensure that we are not complicit in perpetuating these systems of inequality." Jamal felt a surge of emotion rise within him. He had always known that what he discovered at his company was wrong, but he had never thought there was anything he could do to change it. Listening to Sophia, he felt like he wasn't alone anymore. There were people out there like her, fighting for what was right, and maybe, just maybe, he could do something too. When the seminar ended, Jamal decided to stay behind. He wanted to talk to Sophia, to share his story. But as he approached the stage, he felt his heart racing. He worried about whether she would listen to him, whether his story was important enough for her to care. Sophia was speaking with a group of people, but when Jamal got closer, she turned to him with a warm smile. "Hi there," she said. "What did you think of the seminar?" Jamal took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "I thought it was incredible," he said. "Really inspiring. I work in tech, and I think I've seen some of the things you were talking about." Sophia tilted her head slightly, her expression growing more serious. "Can you tell me more?" she asked. Jamal hesitated for a moment, but then he decided to speak. He told her about the facial recognition system his company was developing, how it had a high error rate when identifying Black people, and how it was being used to monitor neighborhoods predominantly populated by Black and immigrant communities. He also shared how he had tried to report the issue to his supervisor, only to be dismissed. Sophia listened intently, not interrupting him once. When he finished, she nodded, her expression filled with understanding. "Thank you for sharing that," she said. "I know it's not easy, but you did the right thing by speaking up, and I think we can do something to change this." Sophia introduced Jamal to a woman standing nearby, whom she called Rachel Martinez. Rachel was a civil rights attorney of Latin American descent, with a strong, confident demeanor and sharp, intelligent eyes. "Jamal, this is Rachel," Sophia said. "She's one of the best when it comes to fighting for justice. If you decide to speak out, she'll be here to protect you." Rachel shook Jamal's hand, her smile both kind and serious. "It's nice to meet you, Jamal," she said. "Sophia has told me about cases like this before. I know this isn't easy, but if you have evidence, we can do something to change the situation." Jamal felt a glimmer of hope, but he couldn't shake his anxiety. "I don't know. he said. "I'm afraid that if I speak out, they'll destroy me. I've worked so hard to get to where I am. I don't want to lose everything." Rachel nodded, her expression softening. "I understand," she said, "and I won't lie to you. This won't be easy. They will do everything they can to silence you. But if you don't speak out, who will? If you don't act, others will continue to be harmed by this system." Sophia placed a reassuring hand on Jamal's shoulder. "You're not alone," she said. "We'll be here to support you. But first, you need to gather more evidence. We need enough information to prove what you're saying is true." Rachel agreed. "Exactly," she said. "If you can collect documents, emails, or any other evidence that shows this system is flawed and that your company knows about it but refuses to fix it, we'll have a much stronger case." Sophia and Rachel also introduced Jamal to Lisa Harper, a well-known investigative journalist who had exposed numerous stories of injustice. Lisa was a white woman with short hair and piercing eyes. She shook Jamal's hand and said, "I've heard about cases like this before, but I need someone on the inside like you to help me tell the story. If you're willing, I'll make sure your story is told truthfully and fairly." Jamal felt like he was standing at a major crossroads in his life. He knew that if he decided to speak out, his life would never be the same. But he also knew that if he did nothing, he would never be able to forgive himself. "All right," he said, his voice steadier now. "I'll do it, but I need time to prepare." Sophia, Rachel, and Lisa all nodded, their expressions filled with encouragement. "We'll be here," Sophia said. "You're not alone, Jamal. We'll do this together." Jamal Carter sat at his desk scrolling through the news on his phone during a rare quiet moment at work. The headline caught his eye immediately: "Brooklyn teacher wrongfully arrested due to faulty facial recognition system." His heart sank as he clicked on the article, the words blurring together as he read about the ordeal of Malcolm Reed, a black high school teacher who had been mistakenly identified as a wanted criminal by a facial recognition system. Jamal's stomach churned as he realized the system in question was the very one his company had developed. The article detailed how Malcolm had been walking home from school when police officers stopped him on the street. Confused and frightened, he complied with their orders, only to be handcuffed in front of his students and neighbors. The police claimed the facial recognition system had flagged him as a suspect in a robbery that had occurred miles away. Despite Malcolm's protests and his insistence that he had been teaching in his classroom at the time of the crime, he was taken into custody. It wasn't until hours later, after his alibi was confirmed, that he was released. By then, the damage had been done. Videos of the arrest had gone viral, sparking outrage across the community. Jamal felt a wave of nausea as he scrolled through the comments on social media. People were furious, and rightfully so. Many pointed out how facial recognition technology disproportionately misidentified people of color, a fact Jamal knew all too well. He had seen the data himself during the development process. The system's error rate for black faces was significantly higher than for white faces, a flaw that had been brushed aside by his superiors as statistically insignificant. But now, that insignificance had led to the public humiliation and trauma of an innocent man. As he continued reading, Jamal learned that Malcolm's arrest had ignited protests in Brooklyn. Community leaders, activists, and residents were demanding accountability, not just from the police, but also from the companies that created and sold these flawed technologies. Signs reading "Algorithms aren't neutral" and "Stop racist tech" were held high as crowds marched through the streets. Jamal could almost hear their chants through the screen, their anger and frustration palpable even in the photos and videos. He leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. This wasn't just a theoretical problem anymore. It wasn't just numbers on a spreadsheet or lines of code on a screen. This was real. A man's life had been upended because of the system he had helped build. Jamal felt a deep sense of guilt settle over him, heavy and suffocating. He had known the system was flawed, but he had convinced himself that it wasn't his responsibility to fix it. After all, he was just one engineer in a massive corporation. What could he do? But now, faced with the undeniable consequences of his work, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that he had been complicit. He thought back to the countless meetings where he had raised concerns about the system's bias, only to be dismissed by his supervisor, Alan White. "The clients don't care about these edge cases," Alan had said. "They just want a product that works most of the time." Jamal had wanted to push back, to argue that most of the time wasn't good enough when lives were at stake, but he hadn't. He had stayed silent, afraid of jeopardizing his job and his career. Now, That silence felt like a betrayal, not just to Malcolm Reed, but to every person who could be harmed by the system in the future. Jamal couldn't stop thinking about Malcolm's face in the photos accompanying the article, the look of confusion and fear as he was handcuffed, the exhaustion and humiliation as he left the police station. Jamal knew he couldn't undo what had happened, but he also knew he couldn't stand by and let it happen again. That evening, Jamal couldn't focus on anything else. He sat in his small apartment, the glow of his laptop screen illuminating his troubled expression. He began researching similar cases, and what he found only deepened his resolve. Malcolm's story wasn't an isolated incident. Across the country, there were numerous reports of facial recognition systems misidentifying people of color, leading to wrongful arrests, denied opportunities, and even deportations. The technology was being hailed as a breakthrough in law enforcement and security, but for marginalized communities, it was becoming yet another tool of oppression. Jamal's thoughts turned to the protests in Brooklyn. He watched live streams of the demonstrations, listening to speakers call for justice and reform. One woman's words struck a chord with him. "These systems aren't broken. They're working exactly as they were designed to. And that's the problem. They were designed without us in mind." Jamal felt a pang of shame. She was right. The system he had worked on wasn't broken. It was incomplete, built on data that excluded and dehumanized people like him and Malcolm. The next day at work, Jamal couldn't concentrate. Every line of code he wrote felt meaningless, every meeting a reminder of the company's indifference. He found himself replaying conversations with Alan White in his head, the man's dismissive tone echoing like a taunt. Jamal wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but he knew it would be futile. Alan had made it clear that profits came before ethics, and Jamal doubted he would change his mind now. Instead, Jamal decided to take matters into his own hands. He began combing through the company's internal documents, looking for anything that could prove they were aware of the system's flaws and had chosen to ignore them. He found emails from the early stages of development, where engineers had flagged the bias in the training data. He found meeting notes where executives had decided not to allocate resources to address the issue, citing time constraints and budget limitations. And he found contracts with law enforcement agencies, detailing how the system would be used in surveillance and policing, despite its known inaccuracies. As Jamal gathered the evidence, he felt a mix of fear and determination. He knew the risks of what he was doing. If he was caught, he could lose his job, his reputation, and possibly even face legal consequences. But he also knew he couldn't live with himself if he stayed silent. Malcolm Reed's story had been the wake-up call he needed. This wasn't just about one man's wrongful arrest. It was about a system that perpetuated injustice and a company that prioritized profits over people. Jamal thought about the people who might stand with him. He remembered Sophia Lee, the activist he had met at the technology and ethics seminar. Her words about the responsibility of tech creators had stayed with him, a constant reminder that he had the power to make a difference. He also thought about Rachel Martinez, the civil rights attorney Sophia had introduced him to. Rachel had told him that speaking out wouldn't be easy, but that she would be there to support him if he chose to do so. And then there was Lisa Harper, the investigative journalist who had offered to help bring his story to light. That evening, Jamal reached out to Sophia. He told her about Malcolm Reed, about the protests, and about the evidence he had found. Sophia listened patiently, her voice calm but firm, as she reassured him that he was doing the right thing. "This is bigger than you or me," she said. "It's about holding these systems accountable and making sure they don't continue to harm people." Sophia connected Jamal with Rachel and Lisa, and the three of them began planning their next steps. Rachel advised Jamal on how to protect himself legally, while Lisa worked with him to document his findings in a way that would be compelling and irrefutable. They knew they were up against a powerful corporation with vast resources, but they also knew that the truth was on their side. As the days went by, Jamal felt a growing sense of purpose. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was doing something that mattered. The guilt that had weighed him down began to lift, replaced by a determination to make things right. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he also knew he wasn't alone. With Sophia, Rachel, and Lisa by his side, he felt ready to take on the fight. The protests in Brooklyn continued to grow, drawing attention from national media. Malcolm Reed spoke out about his experience, calling for an end to the use of flawed facial recognition technology. His courage inspired Jamal, reminding him of why he had decided to act. This wasn't just about exposing a company's negligence. It was about standing up for justice, for accountability, and for the countless people who could be harmed if nothing changed. Jamal knew there was no turning back now. The spark that had been ignited by Malcolm's story had become a fire, and he was ready to let it burn. Jamal Carter sat in his dimly lit apartment, the glow of his laptop screen illuminating his determined face. The weight of his decision pressed heavily on his shoulders, but he knew there was no turning back. Over the past few weeks, he had been meticulously gathering evidence, emails, technical reports, and testing data, all of which painted a damning picture of the facial recognition system his company had developed. The evidence was clear. The system was deeply flawed, and its biases disproportionately harmed people of color. Jamal had always known this, but now he had the proof to back it up. Each document he uncovered felt like another nail in the coffin of his company's credibility. He found emails from engineers who had raised concerns about the system's accuracy during its development, only to be ignored by management. He discovered internal reports that highlighted the system's higher error rates for black and brown faces, reports that had been buried under layers of corporate bureaucracy. And most damning of all, he found contracts with law enforcement agencies that showed the company had knowingly sold the flawed system for use in surveillance and policing, despite being fully aware of its shortcomings. Jamal's hands trembled as he saved the files onto an encrypted drive. He knew the risks of what he was doing. If he was caught, he could lose his job, his career, and possibly even face legal consequences. But every time he thought about backing out, he remembered Malcolm Reed, the innocent teacher who had been wrongfully arrested because of the system. He thought about the protests in Brooklyn, the signs that read "Stop Racist Tech," and the chants demanding accountability. He thought about the countless other people who could be harmed if he stayed silent. And he thought about his own conscience, the voice inside him that refused to let him look the other way. The next morning, Jamal arrived at the office with a sense of unease. He had been careful to cover his tracks, but he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. As he walked through the sleek, glass-walled corridors of the tech company, he noticed Alan White, his supervisor, standing near the break room. Alan's piercing gaze followed Jamal as he passed, and Jamal felt a chill run down his spine. He tried to act normal, but he could feel the weight of Alan's suspicion. Later that afternoon, Jamal's worst fears were confirmed. His phone buzzed with a calendar notification. Meeting with Alan White, 3 p.m. The subject line was vague, but Jamal knew exactly what it was about. He had been caught. At 3 o'clock sharp, Jamal entered Alan's office. The room was cold and sterile, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Manhattan. Alan sat behind his desk, his expression unreadable. He gestured for Jamal to sit, and Jamal complied, his heart pounding in his chest. "Jamal," Alan began, his voice calm but laced with an undercurrent of menace. "I've been hearing some interesting things about you lately." Jamal didn't respond. He knew better than to incriminate himself. Alan leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "I know what you've been doing," he said. "You've been digging through internal files, collecting data, and let's not pretend it's for a project. You're trying to undermine this company." Jamal's stomach tightened, but he forced himself to stay composed. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice steady. Alan smirked as if amused by Jamal's defiance. "Don't play dumb with me," he said. "I've seen the logs. I know exactly which files you've accessed. And let me make one thing very clear. If you continue down this path, I will personally make sure you never work in this industry again. Do you really want to throw away your career over a few minor bugs in the system?" Jamal felt a surge of anger rise within him. "Minor bugs?" he said, his voice rising despite himself. "Those minor bugs are ruining people's lives. An innocent man was arrested because of this system. How many more people have to suffer before we do something about it?" Alan's expression hardened. "This isn't about morality, Jamal. This is about business. The system works well enough for our clients, and that's all that matters. If you can't accept that, then maybe you're in the wrong line of work." Jamal stared at Alan, his mind racing. He knew he was at a crossroads. He could back down, delete the files, and pretend none of this had ever happened. Or he could stand his ground, knowing full well the consequences. "I'm not going to stay silent," Jamal said finally, his voice firm. "People deserve to know the truth." Alan's smirk returned, but this time it was colder, more calculating. "Suit yourself," he said, "but don't say I didn't warn you." That evening, Jamal sat in his apartment, his mind replaying the confrontation with Alan. He felt a mix of fear and determination. Alan's threats were real, and Jamal knew the man had the power to follow through on them. But he also knew he couldn't let fear dictate his actions. He had come too far to back down now. Jamal opened his laptop and composed an email to Lisa Harper, the investigative journalist Sophia Lee had introduced him to. He attached the encrypted files and wrote a brief message explaining what they contained. His hands shook as he hovered over the send button, but he took a deep breath and clicked it. There was no turning back now. Lisa responded almost immediately, thanking Jamal for his courage and assuring him that she would handle the information with the utmost care. Over the next few days, she began digging deeper into the story, using the evidence Jamal had provided as a starting point. She reached out to other employees at the company, some of whom confirmed Jamal's claims, but were too afraid to speak on the record. She also interviewed experts on algorithmic bias, who explained how flawed systems like the one Jamal's company had developed could perpetuate systemic racism. As Lisa's investigation progressed, Jamal felt a growing sense of both relief and anxiety. He was no longer carrying the burden alone, but he also knew that once the story went public, his life would never be the same. He tried to prepare himself for the fallout, but the uncertainty was overwhelming. A week later, Lisa's article was published. The headline was bold and unflinching. Tech giant's flawed facial recognition system fuels racial injustice. The article detailed the system's biases, the company's decision to ignore warnings from its own engineers, and the real-world consequences of their negligence. It included interviews with experts, activists, and even Malcolm Reed, who shared his harrowing experience of being wrongfully arrested. But the most damning part of the article was the internal documents Lisa had obtained, which left no doubt that the company had prioritized profits over ethics. The article spread like wildfire, quickly becoming a trending topic on social media. Activists and community leaders called for accountability, demanding that the company halt the use of its facial recognition system until the issues were addressed. Lawmakers began discussing the need for stricter regulations on the use of such technologies. And within the company, chaos erupted as executives scrambled to contain the damage. Jamal watched the fallout unfold from the safety of his apartment. He felt a mix of emotions, relief that the truth was finally out, pride in having done the right thing, and fear of what might come next. He knew his identity would eventually be revealed, and when that happened, he would have to face the consequences. Sure enough, it didn't take long for the company to identify Jamal as the whistleblower. He received a terse email from HR informing him that he was being placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. He knew it was only a matter of time before he was fired, but Jamal didn't regret his decision. As he watched the protests outside the company's headquarters, where people held signs reading "Justice for Malcolm" and "Fix the System," he felt a sense of hope. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but this was a start. And for the first time in a long time, Jamal felt like he was on the right side of history. In the weeks that followed, Jamal's life changed in ways he couldn't have anticipated. He received messages of support from people all over the world, thanking him for his courage and sharing their own stories of being harmed by biased technology. Activist groups reached out to him, offering to help him navigate the challenges ahead. And while he faced backlash from the company and its supporters, he also found a community of people who believed in the same principles he did. Jamal knew the road ahead would be difficult. He would likely face legal battles, financial struggles, and ongoing threats to his career. But he also knew that he had done the right thing. And as he stood among the protesters one evening holding a sign that read, "Algorithms shouldn't decide lives," he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was just the beginning, and he was ready to keep fighting. Jamal Carter sat in his small apartment, the glow of his laptop screen illuminating his tense face. He had stayed up all night waiting for Lisa Harper's article to be published. The story he had risked everything to expose was about to go public. At 6 a.m., a notification popped up on his screen. Tech giant's flawed facial recognition system fuels racial injustice. The article had made it to the front page of one of the country's largest newspapers. Jamal clicked the link, his eyes scanning every word. Lisa had done an incredible job. The article not only told Jamal's story but also presented undeniable evidence, internal emails, technical reports, and testing data he had provided. Lisa had also interviewed experts in technology and ethics who explained how the facial recognition system his company developed not only failed to accurately identify Black individuals, but also perpetuated systemic injustice. The article ended with a powerful question. Can we trust technology companies that refuse to take responsibility for the consequences of their products? Within hours, the article went viral across social media. The hashtags #JusticeForJamal and #StopRacistTech began trending on Twitter. Activists, politicians, and everyday people spoke out. Personal stories of discrimination caused by facial recognition systems started to surface. People denied jobs, others wrongfully arrested due to the flawed technology. In New York, protests erupted across the city. Thousands gathered outside the company's headquarters, holding signs that read, "Technology must not discriminate. AI is not a tool for injustice. We are not faulty data." Jamal watched the crowds from afar, his phone screen showing live streams of the protests. He felt a mix of pride and anxiety. He knew he had done the right thing, but he also understood that the fight was far from over. At the company's headquarters, CEO Ethan Miller was under unprecedented pressure. Investors were panicking, the company's stock was plummeting, and city officials had launched a formal investigation. Ethan called an emergency meeting with his top executives, including Alan White. "We need to get this under control immediately," Ethan said, his voice tense. "Who's responsible for this? How did this happen?" Alan, sitting in the corner of the room, tried to remain calm. "I think the problem lies with Jamal Carter," he said, his tone measured but calculated. "He exaggerated the issue. The errors he pointed out aren't as serious as the article makes them seem. This is just an attempt to smear the company." Ethan stared at Alan, suspicion in his eyes. "He has evidence, and the article has turned the entire world against us. This is not a minor issue." Alan tried to defend himself. "I warned Jamal multiple times, but he wouldn't listen. He just wanted to cause trouble." Ethan didn't respond immediately. He knew Alan was trying to shift the blame to protect himself, but that didn't change the fact that the company was on the brink of collapse. After a long pause, Ethan said, "We need to hold a press conference. I'll face the public. But Alan, if any more damaging information comes out, I won't hesitate to sacrifice you to save this company." Alan nodded, but deep down, he knew his position was precarious. 2 days later, Ethan Miller stepped onto the podium in a packed press room. Camera flashes lit up the room as he began to speak. "We are aware of the concerns raised in the recent article," Ethan said, his voice carefully controlled. "We are committed to conducting an internal investigation to identify the flaws in our system. We will also cooperate with authorities to ensure our technology does not harm anyone." A reporter raised their hand. "Mr. Miller, your company was aware of these issues beforehand, but continued to sell the system to law enforcement agencies. Can you explain why?" Ethan hesitated, searching for a justification. "We believed our system was a valuable tool, but it's clear there are issues that need to be addressed. We will work hard to improve." Another reporter interjected. "Jamal Carter, who provided the information for the article, has been fired. Do you think this is fair?" Ethan faltered. "We cannot comment on specific personnel matters, but I want to emphasize that we do not condone any actions that harm the company." The press conference quickly spiraled into chaos as reporters bombarded Ethan with tough questions. He left the podium with a strained expression, knowing his words had done little to calm the public outrage. Meanwhile, Jamal received an official notice from the company. He had been terminated for violating confidentiality policies. Though he had prepared himself for this, reading those words still stung. He had dedicated years to the company, only to be treated like a traitor. But Jamal wasn't alone. Rachel Martinez, his lawyer, was ready to fight for him. "They can't do this to you," Rachel said, her eyes filled with determination. "We're going to sue them for retaliating against a whistleblower, and we're going to win." Rachel not only helped Jamal protect his reputation, but also took the case to court. During the hearings, the evidence Jamal had provided was presented to the public, leaving the company with no room to deny its wrongdoing. Under mounting pressure from the public and investors, Ethan Miller was forced to resign. Alan White, who had tried to pin the blame on Jamal, was also fired. In the aftermath, the company pledged to overhaul its systems to eliminate bias. They established an independent oversight committee to monitor future projects, including ethicists and representatives from affected communities. Jamal, though jobless, became a symbol of courage and integrity. He received job offers from numerous nonprofits and tech companies committed to creating fairer systems. However, instead of returning to the industry, Jamal decided to join Sophia Lee at Code for Justice to continue fighting against bias in technology. One afternoon, as Jamal stood amidst another protest in New York, He saw young people holding signs that read, "Thank you, Jamal. Technology for people, not profit." Jamal smiled. He knew his journey was far from over, but he also knew he had done the right thing. And that, to him, was everything. Jamal Carter stood in the bustling office of Code for Justice, a nonprofit organization dedicated to fighting algorithmic bias and promoting ethical technology. The air was filled with the hum of conversations, the clatter of keyboards, and the occasional burst of laughter from the team. It was a stark contrast to the sterile corporate environment he had left behind. Here, Jamal felt a sense of purpose he had never experienced before. He wasn't just writing code, he was helping to rewrite the future. Sophia Lee, the founder of Code for Justice, walked over to Jamal's desk, holding a cup of coffee in one hand and a stack of papers in the other. "How's the new project coming along?" she asked, her voice warm but focused. Jamal looked up from his screen, a faint smile on his face. "It's coming together. We're testing a new data set that prioritizes diversity and fairness. If it works, it could be a game changer for facial recognition technology." Sophia nodded, her eyes lighting up with excitement. "That's exactly what we need. The world is watching us now, Jamal. What we're doing here could set the standard for ethical AI." Jamal felt a surge of pride. For the first time in his career, he wasn't just a cog in a machine. He was part of something bigger, something meaningful. But he also knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The fight against systemic bias in technology was far from over, and the scars of his battle with his former company were still fresh. One afternoon, as Jamal was reviewing a report on algorithmic fairness, he heard a familiar voice behind him. "So, this is where the revolution happens, huh?" Jamal turned around to see Derek Brown, his former colleague. Derek had always been skeptical of Jamal's decision to speak out against their company. He had warned Jamal about the risks, about the potential fallout. But now, standing in the doorway of Code for Justice, Derek looked different. There was a determination in his eyes that Jamal hadn't seen before. "Derek," Jamal said, surprised, "what are you doing here?" Derek stepped into the room, his hands in his pockets. "I've been thinking a lot about what you did, what you risked. At first I thought you were crazy, but then I saw the protests, the articles, the changes happening because of you, and I realized staying silent only makes things worse." Jamal studied Derek for a moment, then smiled. "So, you're ready to join the fight?" Derek nodded. "Yeah, I want to help. I've seen firsthand how these systems can hurt people, and I can't just sit back and watch anymore." Sophia, who had been listening from across the room, walked over and extended her hand. "Welcome to the team, Derek. We can use all the help we can get." With Derek on board, the team at Code for Justice grew stronger. His experience and insights from working within the tech industry proved invaluable as they tackled new challenges and developed innovative solutions. Meanwhile, the impact of Jamal's whistleblowing continued to ripple through New York City. The public outcry had forced lawmakers to take action. Under pressure from activists, journalists, and concerned citizens, the City Council introduced a series of groundbreaking regulations aimed at ensuring transparency and accountability in the use of artificial intelligence. The new policies required companies to conduct regular audits of their AI systems to identify and address biases. They also mandated that any organization using AI in decision-making processes, whether for hiring, law enforcement, or public services, must disclose how their algorithms worked and provide avenues for individuals to challenge unfair outcomes. At a press conference announcing the new regulations, Mayor Elena Torres praised the efforts of activists like Jamal and organizations like Code for Justice. "This is a historic moment for our city," she said. "We are setting a precedent for how technology should be used, not as a tool of oppression, but as a force for good. And we owe much of this progress to the bravery of individuals who dared to speak out against injustice." Jamal watched the press conference from the office, surrounded by his colleagues. As the mayor mentioned his name, the room erupted into applause. Jamal felt a mix of pride and humility. He hadn't sought recognition. He had simply done what he believed was right. But seeing the tangible changes his actions had sparked filled him with hope. As Jamal's story spread, it became a symbol of resistance against injustice in the age of technology. Universities invited him to speak at conferences on ethics and AI. Activists around the world reached out to share their own struggles and seek advice. Even tech companies, eager to rebuild their reputations, began consulting with Code for Justice on how to create fairer systems. One evening, Jamal received an email from a young programmer in India. The subject line read, "You inspired me." In the email, the programmer explained how they had uncovered bias in a local government's AI system and were now working to fix it. "Your story gave me the courage to act," the email concluded. "Thank you for showing me that one person can make a difference." Jamal sat back in his chair, moved by the message. He had always hoped his actions would make an impact, but seeing how far his influence had reached was overwhelming. It reminded him that the fight for justice wasn't confined to one city or one country. It was a global struggle, and every voice mattered. Despite the progress, Jamal's journey wasn't without challenges. The legal battle with his former company had taken a toll on him, both emotionally and financially. There were days when he questioned whether it had all been worth it. But every time doubt crept in, he thought about the people who had been wronged by biased systems, the innocent individuals arrested, the qualified candidates denied jobs, the communities marginalized by technology, and he knew he couldn't give up. Rachel Martinez, the lawyer who had stood by him throughout the ordeal, remained a close friend and confidant. One evening, over coffee, she said, "You know, Jamal, what you did was more than just expose a flawed system. You showed people that they have power, that they can demand better." Jamal smiled. "I couldn't have done it without you, Rachel. You believed in me when no one else did." Rachel shook her head. "You didn't need me to believe in you. You just needed someone to remind you of your own strength." Their conversation reminded Jamal of the importance of community. He hadn't fought this battle alone. Sophia, Rachel, Lisa, and countless others had supported him every step of the way. And now, he was part of a growing movement, united by a shared vision of a fairer, more just world. As the months turned into years, Code for Justice continued to grow. The organization launched new initiatives to address bias in other areas of technology, from predictive policing algorithms to healthcare AI systems. Jamal took on a leadership role, mentoring young programmers and advocating for systemic change. One day, as he walked through the streets of New York, he passed a mural painted on the side of a building. It depicted a diverse group of people standing together, holding signs that read, "Technology for all," and "Justice through innovation." In the center of the mural was a figure that looked strikingly like Jamal, his fist raised in defiance. Jamal stopped and stared at the mural, a lump forming in his throat. He hadn't expected to become a symbol, but he was grateful for the opportunity to inspire others. He pulled out his phone and took a picture, sending it to Sophia with the caption, "Look what we've started." Sophia replied almost immediately, "This is just the beginning." Jamal smiled. She was right. The fight for justice was far from over, but for the first time, he felt confident that change was possible. Together, they were building a future where technology served everyone, not just the privileged few. And that, Jamal thought, was a future worth fighting for. The story of Jamal Carter serves as a powerful reminder that technology, no matter how advanced, is not always objective. When designed without consideration for fairness and accountability, it can unintentionally, or even intentionally, exacerbate existing injustices in society. But this story is also a testament to the power of courage and determination. Jamal, with the support of allies like Sophia, Rachel, Lisa, and even Derek, proved that one individual can spark significant change. When we dare to speak up, confront unjust systems, and act for what is right, we not only protect ourselves but also pave the way for a better future for everyone. Thank you for following this story. We hope it has inspired you to believe in the power of change and the importance of building a fairer world, where technology serves humanity rather than harming it. Remember, every small action can contribute to making a big difference.